Thanks to those of you who are introducing yourselves in the chat. If you're just joining us, you could just give us a short introduction of who you are, if you have a business, and what you're hoping to learn today. That'll kind of help us through the conversation. So today we're talking about starting an A team, building an A team for the business that you're starting. My name is Megan Speary, and I work at the Papa John's Center for Entrepreneurship, which is a department at Iowa State that serves all colleges across campus and the greater community to help people start something and to just foster entrepreneurship. So today, I would just want to say a few etiquette things before we hop into the content. We ask that you do please keep your videos off just because it helps with speed on our end. And then if you do have questions throughout, please use the chat to ask them. We'd love for this to be interactive, so go ahead and ask your questions when you think of them, and we'll include them at the end or during the session if it makes sense with the stuff that we're talking about. We are going to be recording this session, so just keep that in mind, and we'll be sharing it on YouTube after we're done today. And we're going to be sending you the slides as well as some cliff notes and that recording. So you'll see today the slides have a lot of words on them. They're meant to be supplemental to the conversation and more like notes for you to take away after the fact. So we will be sending them to you. No worries about writing everything down. All right, let's hop right in. So today, our speaker is Clayton Mooney, who is the co-founder and CEO of Nebulum, and has also co-founded another company called Kenasol and has just a plethora of experience in the entrepreneurship space. So Clayton, I'll hand it over to you. And if you could just give us an introduction of who you are and kind of what your entrepreneurship experience looks like.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Megan. So one, as Megan mentioned, I love to have the conversation going. So any questions at any point, drop it in the chat and we'll get to it. But today I'm co-founder and CEO of Nebulum. And at Nebulum, we build indoor farms that grow and deliver healthier food direct to consumers. About 5 years into this venture, before Nebulum, I was co-founder and chief product officer at Kenasol. And at Kenasol is also food tech, but we focused on solar food dehydrators for farmers in developing regions. About 8 years now into building technology companies. And I should preface that most of my entrepreneurial journey has been on the tech side and less on the lifestyle or Main Street business side. But hopefully there's some wisdom that I could share that helps everybody across the board there. When I'm not building companies and to de-stress, I run long distances in the woods. And then I'm also a volunteer assistant coach at Iowa State for boxing, which has been awesome. I've been there since 2016. And where my strengths lie as a founder and entrepreneur, because I am not a technical founder, so you don't want me around power tools and I can't code. So where my strengths lie are on the team building side, fundraising or telling that story to investors, and business model innovation. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Clayton. So you have a pretty interesting story. Can you give us a little bit of background and tell us kind of like maybe what the last few years looked like before you got to Nebulum?
Yeah, so I make a really bad employee. So most of my life, I've been self-employed. I'm about to turn 35. I think I've been self-employed all but essentially 2 years. And prior to technology companies, I played poker full-time. When you think of playing poker full-time, maybe it's time spent in a casino. And I did go to World Series of Poker in Las Vegas every year, but the majority of my time playing poker was online. And from an earlier age, I treated it like a video game that then became an income, that then became a lifestyle, that then became a career. Something that poker helped me to prepare for when starting companies is being process-oriented instead of results-oriented. And from an early stage of playing poker, it's all calculated risk, right? Just like starting a company. But I learned that most days it's going to be really difficult and you have to just grind through it. And applying that to startups has helped me have a little bit more grit and gratitude for what I'm building. But that's it. Started as a poker player, moved into food tech companies, and here I am. I'm aging in dog years, but love what I do.
That's awesome. Thanks, Clayton. All right, so let's jump right into A teams. So you've built a great team at Nebulum, and we're gonna start kind of from the beginning. So first, how do you start growing your team? And there are ways to do this maybe before you can hire employees, right? So can you talk about that a little bit and maybe where you started at Nebulum or Kinosol?
Yeah. So I think it's really important to play to your strengths. So a lot of times what I've experienced is either someone has the business idea, but they can't really bring it to life, whether it's software or a physical product, or someone has the product idea, but they don't know the business model. So I think it's very important to consider having a co-founder. At Kinosol, there were 4 co-founders. And in my opinion, that's probably too many, just because at points you can have too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. But at Nebulum, we started with just 2 of us, and Danon Poole is our co-founder and chief technology officer, where I'm co-founder and CEO. Danon's strengths lie in the plant biology and mechanical engineering side, where I already mentioned where my strengths lie. So we kind of make a good yin and yang team, and we can play to our strengths and put us together, and we can build a product and sell a product. And I think that's really important just as a base understanding for if you have a business idea or a venture idea. When it comes to startups, we're always under-resourced. And if you're under-resourced, you have to get pretty creative with growing a team and recruiting. Today, I'm incredibly just proud and grateful for the team we have at Nebulum. We're at about a dozen of us. By the end of this year, we'll be between 20 and 25 team members. And throughout the years, what we found when thinking about building a team, I got 100% wrong at the beginning. I thought the story was because we're a technology company and we need to raise venture capital to scale Nebulum. I thought the answer to that was going and pitching investors and saying, look, we need your check so we can hire these people. But most of the early stage investors I met with actually told me we needed to figure out how to recruit them before going back and pitching, because they want to see that you're able to tell that story and sell someone on that and wanting them to join your team. So it's kind of the chicken and the egg problem. So if you don't have the money in the bank, how do you recruit somebody? So some creative ways that we focused on started with friends and our personal network and asked if they could help us over the weekends. Whether they're truly volunteering or we gave them some lettuce or got them, a 6-pack of beer for helping us assemble something. You have to get pretty creative there. Another thing that we noticed early on was having Iowa State in our backyard for starting a company, especially in food tech, was awesome. There's so many talented individuals with diverse backgrounds who are both in the engineering side, clear through the horticulture side. So there's a lot of resources between the state and in Ames to help cover some of the internships you can offer. So the Ryman internship through the Papa John Center has been awesome. It's helped support us and being able to bring on additional team members throughout the years. But there's some ways to subsidize. Another thing that I think about that I've had to learn the hard way is, if you have the perfect person in mind for a position, a lot of times you hire for what you think you need, and then you realize you should have hired for exactly what you needed at that point. So for us, the mistake that I made the most in the first couple of years at both companies was the fact that we'd find this perfect candidate and instantly offer them a full-time position. Looking back, there's value in seeing if someone wants to jump in and work on a contract basis or as a one-off project, because then you can see if they have the right technical skill set, but they also have the right soft skills. And when I think about soft skills, that kind of translates into culture. And that's something I definitely wanted to touch base on. I see a lot of talk nowadays around fully remote teams, hybrid teams. Personally, just my belief is early stage company, you need to all be in the same room. And I know that takes away from recruiting in other locations, but I think especially as a physical product or a hardware company, it's important to all be in the same space. So I'm very bearish on fully remote work. So I just want to preface it there. But when trying to build out that team, the culture you're building, you can't really put together a playbook and say, this is what we're going to do and here's our values, because the culture at the end of the day is what the founders believe. So whatever is exuding from Danon and I during a team meeting is going to be kind of that barrier or that line of how the organization thinks. So what we value is radical transparency. Sometimes it can be very uncomfortable telling somebody where they effed up or where they messed up directly and in front of people. But we're doing it out of love because we save ourselves time, we save them time, therefore we save and increase the likelihood of Nebulum having a successful journey by saving everybody time. But that can be really hard. So on the culture side, that's really, really important as you're building a team, the right culture fit. You'll hear that of, awesome skill set, wrong culture fit, et cetera. In this day and age, you have to make that a priority. And so starting them on part-time work or a project basis is one of those ways to do that. And Megan, you had a couple of other bullet points here. On the freelancer side, there's a good example around that. So one, I'm partially colorblind, so you don't want me building websites. And in the past, I've had to do that, and it looked really bad, really ugly. So when we think about a new website designer, if you're launching and you don't have an eye for design, freelancers, especially around design, where it's a project, using Upwork, Fiverr, posting on SciHire, all of those are awesome ways to get someone who can bring their talents in and help you on a one-off project. So you can kind of gauge how they're doing. Plus, it doesn't extend hopefully your money outside of your actual budget. Virtual assistants, I won't touch base on just because have not experienced that ourselves yet.
Awesome. So the takeaway, hopefully, is that there are a lot of ways to get help outside of yourself that don't always mean jumping right into a full-time employee. And sometimes trying things on a more temporary basis is a better way to start. So when you do decide to grow your team, whether that's through part-time or outsourcing certain things, how do you pick which things to first outsource and to know like what type of person you're looking for?
Yeah, you have to know yourself. So I'll start with maybe just out of left field. It's important to know your strengths, and one way to do that is to have coaches. So right now, I have 3 coaches. I have a running coach, I have a founder coach, and I have a therapist, and all of them from an accountability standpoint. That's awesome, but they're all helping me to understand like who I am and where my strengths lie. And I think in a startup, especially how everything is so fast paced, you don't have time to try to improve your weaknesses necessarily. So if you can, from day one, understand your strengths and you map out kind of like an organization chart or what you think you need to kind of fill in these missing puzzle pieces for individuals, I think that really helps you visualize. So at Nebulum, we've done that multiple times throughout the years because we've changed business models. We've pivoted many times, many different directions. And every pivot, we sit back down and draw out our organization chart. And when thinking about noticing where we are lacking, I like the analogy of it's a puzzle. And if it's a 1,000-piece puzzle and you get the puzzle assembled, then great, you've won. And in our case, we'd consider that an exit or an IPO for Nebulum. But every one of those puzzle pieces are a partnership or a key team member. So the most recent example of that is middle part of last year when we realized our direct-to-consumer model was working for Nebulum. We redrew the organization chart and realized that we are no longer just an indoor farm or a vertical farming technology company. We are now a data company sitting on top of a supply chain company, sitting on top of an indoor farm. So when I drew that out, I realized we have no supply chain experts. We have no one on the team who could take machine learning and take all of our data coming in to understand customer behaviors and yield predictions. And then on top of that, while I love spreadsheets, my knowledge base only goes so far. So we put together 3 key kind of C-suite or executive level positions, and that was for Chief Data Officer, Supply Chain and Logistics VP, and then VP of Finance and Procurement. And I spent the second half of last year recruiting those individuals. And when you go after individuals like that with a lot of experience and a lot of industry experience, and when they jump in, it just hits the ground running. You have to get creative with them too, because again, back in startup mode, we can't pay them salary to market rate. So we have to offer more upside on the shares or the sweat equity side. So today at Nebulum, we pay essentially half of market rate for salaries, but we pay on average 10x upside in the shares and the vesting. So we want people to be bought into the vision. And if Nebulum has a large exit, we want everyone on the core team being able to have the opportunity at what we would consider life-changing money.
That's awesome. So as the founder, co-founder, this is kind of like your baby, right? So how do you let go of control? And when you do hire somebody, like truly outsource that work over to them?
Yeah, it's difficult. And I've had to learn by fire. So early days, if you're playing to your strengths and you have ownership and it's you and your co-founder and one's building and shipping the product, the other one's on selling and making sure to think about making sure there's money in the bank or new team members are coming online, you feel like the buck stops with you essentially. And I go back and forth on this every couple of years, but I used to believe in a flat organization. And I think that is a mistake when building a technology company, because everyone needs to have ownership over each of their pockets. And if you have the right people or A players on the team, they have the ownership, they're executing on it. When they mess it up, they're also fixing it. If you can start to put those levers in place, then you as the founder are actually doing the job that you should have set out to do. And that job is to ultimately make it to where your organization, your company doesn't need you. And I think that's really hard to say, because you're like, blood, sweat, and tears going into it. But at the end of the day, if you have architected the organization chart, the business model, the distribution, the scaling, all of that's coming together, you should be able to, disappear and everything should just run without you. And over the last couple of years, Dana and I have put a lot of effort into that and just seeing where we were the bottleneck, where we should have been delegating, and trying to find the right people to put in place to remove that from our plate and let them make those decisions. But it really just comes with learning by fire or making a lot of really bad decisions that somehow you survive through.
It's kind of entrepreneurship, isn't it?
Amen.
So let's take another step back to actually creating a job listing. A startup is a little bit of a different job, right? So how do you build out a description that includes everything that this person's going to have to do when it's maybe a completely new position or a new undertaking? I mean, the whole company's new, right? So how do you kind of handle that?
I think it has to start with your personal network. I've spent a lot of time over the last 8 years building up my network, and almost everybody on the team, we have recruited that they're no more than like 2 degrees of separation away from someone in, first connection, essentially. In order to do that, as the founder, you need to get out there, you need to tell people what you're working on. You need to show excitement and resiliency in what you're building. People need to see the progress, because if from day one you tell them, here's the vision, and they don't see any, practical traction, that's not going to get anyone excited. So when you're out there selling the vision, just telling crowds, whether it's pitching at a 1 million cups or a local on-campus pitch competition to a room full of people, you need to show them why you're excited to be tackling this problem and where you're at currently, but where you're also going. If that's the case, and that becomes part of your narrative, and every few months people see more and more traction of, wow, they made it through this hurdle, or wow, they launched this new product and it seems to be going well. That gets people excited. It's kind of a rising tide raises all ships approach, especially for a smaller startup community like Ames. And as far as recruiting goes and the formality side, that is not one of my strengths. So I'm doing everything we can to, not have to have an official HR in place until post Series A fundraising round for Nebulum. So right now, there's no formal, like, here's all these documents and here's your formal schedule. And we like that because we let people play to their strengths of when they are most beneficial for working. If they need to take time off, that's fine. We make that work. I think that's important for that transparency if everyone's getting their work done. When posting, I don't use anything like Indeed or Monster, any of like the big sites are kind of antiquated in my opinion. It starts with just putting it out on social media, putting out a tweet and saying, here's how, here's what we're looking for. And then I'm going to drop it in chat real quick. What we've built is just using Airtable. It's a free custom database maker. And if anybody reaches out on Twitter, LinkedIn, et cetera, I respond with, hey, thanks for reaching out. If you could complete this quick form, let us know more about you. We'll keep in the system whenever we have an official posting, then everyone in that database gets a heads up 24 hours before everybody else. So right now we have a few positions we're looking to hire for later this year. So those would be drop-down options through the Airtable link. Another thing on just the candidate search too is reference checks. Absolutely needed. It's so important. And I've made the mistake before of we had someone reach out. There was a connection, a mutual connection. We thought it was fine. We made the hire, and come to find out we should have asked for a reference check. Something I've learned more recently is the fact that if you reach out for a reference check and someone says we should jump on a call, that's probably not a good sign. That's happened more recently. But reference checks are super important. One other point that I'd like to make here on this slide is the last 2 points, SciHire and Clay and Milk. If you start with your network, more than likely it's going to start with your local network. But because of Ames being in a college town of 60,000 and that second or third degree of separation, posting on local job boards is pretty good. You can usually track down someone who you trust their input to actually give you the feedback on who that person is. In the past, we've used SciHire, which is awesome, whether it's for internships or internships through full-time positions. And then Clay and Milk is kind of a Midwest focused startup news platform, kind of headquartered in Des Moines. And their job board, especially if you're in the tech scene, it's always expanding. So we've utilized those two job boards before. I think those are kind of the best starting places if you want to focus on local.
Awesome. So when you do an online application as the first step, I'm assuming, right, for most of your positions?
Yeah.
What do you ask for in that, and how do you kind of describe the job?
It's more difficult being a startup because you're going to wear more hats. So it's not just here's your roles and responsibilities and there is nothing outside of that. There's always more. Everyone at the Nebulum team right now gives 110%. And I would say maybe 3/4 their time is roles and responsibilities. The other fourth of the time is wherever they're needed. Whether that's having software team members jump in and do deliveries, or customer success, or having customer success team members jump in and help with harvest. I think that's important to be kind of just well-rounded. Everyone has more respect over each of those departments. But in that initial conversation, the initial point of contact with online, if what they provide to us is clear and succinct communication, and I understand a little bit more about their background, jumping on a call with them is kind of the easiest next step. And then us being, an indoor farm, seeing is believing. So if that call goes well, we try to get them on site for a tour. Walk through, we ask them, what do you think about indoor farming, the future of food? We kind of get a feel for their soft skills at that point because we introduce them to all the team members, which can sometimes be overwhelming, but we understand how that is. If we introduce them to, here's all of our engineering team members, here's customer success, marketing, production. I think that's good to get in front of everybody. And then the following team meeting for Nebulum, asking our team members how they thought about that candidate too, and having that buy-in, I think that's pretty important. When we get beyond that, it really comes down to, are they a right fit at this point in life for them? We've met awesome candidates before who have told us that they need like 5x more salary than we can provide. And what that tells me is they're not bought into the vision because they glimpse over or they highly discount the shares or the option pool. So that's something we kind of have that really high barrier up for over initial conversations over, do you care about sweat equity? Do you care about if Nebulum has an exit in the future that you have a big payday? And if they say, well, no, I care about just maximizing my salary right now, then it's just wrong timing for us, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. So how do you find the people that are excited about a startup and want to be a part of it? I mean, it's kind of a hard ask if they don't totally understand, right? So how do you portray the potential to recruit people?
Yeah, so one of those tools, I'll actually drop it in the chat here, that we started using about 1.5 years ago. This is another Y Combinator-backed company called Front. They're an awesome company. What they built an internal kind of compensation or equity calculator. And they got so much positive feedback that they ended up just open sourcing it. So made it available to everybody and anybody. So that link that I just dropped in chat, that is something that I walk a candidate through and telling them about, hey, here's how many shares we have. Here was our last valuation or evaluation cap. Here's what we'd be aiming for the next round of funding. Here's what we could be looking at an exit over the next 4 to 5 years. And that allows them to go through, plug in the initial starting numbers I've given them and see what they could expect for the upside potential. And it also lets them come back and do the worst case scenario of Nebulum crashes and burns, shares are worth 0. And then it allows them to go to the other end of that spectrum as well and just say, wow, okay, if Nebulum, checks these boxes over the next 4 to 5 years, and this is the potential exit, here's my payday. So that equity calculator has been awesome for us. That really helps to kind of weed out individuals who aren't focused on the equity upside. So that's kind of become gospel for us over the last about 1.5 years.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that resource.
No problem.
Okay, so you've convinced them that they want to join. They've kind of gone through the beginning of the process by submitting online or connecting through a secondary connection. What do you ask them when you interview? And there are some questions on the screen that are like maybe some ideas of what you might ask, but feel free to share things that you ask, or if there are other, if there's like specific things that you really think as a startup you should be asking during an interview.
Yeah, so I think these are awesome starting points, all of the questions here, because that gives you a well-rounded approach of who they are. One thing that, the more the formal the interview, the less likely it's their real self. So getting them on site after a very informal call for a farm tour, and they're walking around, they walk through the offices and they walk through the indoor farm where there's always something going on, always something breaking, 60,000+ plants growing, kind of catch them into a more comfortable setting, or just saying, hey, we're in this space. It's kind of loud and crazy and chaos around here. Asking more questions on site, I think, brings out more of who they are, or we hope anyway, of who they are as individuals. Some of the questions that I've learned to weave in among these questions over the years is, I really want to know why they want to join an indoor farming company. So if you're building, so for instance, in the chat, a goat business or a racehorse business, and you're hiring, you're going to have candidates who deeply and highly care about the animals. They have to be probably at least half as passionate as you are about that entire process. And likely they have some industry experience there. They probably worked with goats and or horses before. I think that's really important to get to that baseline and ask them as upfront as possible of, do they understand the industry? So some of the initial conversation I have is like, why do you think indoor farming is the future? If they can't answer that on the spot, then I feel like they haven't put enough thought into it, and they're looking at it as it's a job. And here's their, one skill set that maybe applies to this job posting we did. A couple of other questions I ask them. So this is a pretty direct question because there's a follow-up question to it. I just say, what are you currently making? And my follow-up question is, what if we could pay you half that? Now, granted, it's not always exactly half that, but I want to see their knee-jerk reaction. And I think that's really important. If I just say, what are you making? And they say 100,000 a year is my comp package. And I said, what if we could pay you 50,000 a year, but give you, 0.5% of the company vesting over 4 years? And that reaction right there tells me a lot as well. And some of our best team members, how they have answered that question is they immediately, they brush off the salary and they immediately go to, well, let's walk through some scenarios. What are those shares worth now? What could they be worth in the future? And that shows me they're thinking more long-term. Another one of the questions that I ask is, what is one thing you believe to be true that most people would disagree with you on? When I ask that on the spot, I tell them that they don't have to immediately have an answer and they could get back to me on that. But I really, really like that question because it shows me more insight on their critical thinking. Whether we're hiring for an internship or hiring for someone to lead a department, that question gets asked across the board, and it really, really helps us to understand how you approach kind of just the world view.
That's awesome. That's a good one. Okay, so now you've hired the person. How do you make sure that they are a good fit for the team, that they get integrated in, and that it is a strong team overall?
Has to start with culture. So Dana and I have built a culture of just being direct, radically transparent. And that goes from, hey, if somebody messes up, go and tell them they need to have ownership over it. They need to fix it. Clear to all team meetings. We talk about our dashboard and our metrics, and we're very data driven as a company. So at any given time, you could walk into the Nebulum office and walk up to any Nebulum team member and ask them how many subscribers we have, what our churn rate is, what our weekly recurring revenue is, what our average order value is. Any of them would be able to tell you that. And that right there brings us all to a level playing field. And then it's very much just divide and conquer. So if we have made the offer and a candidate accepts and jumps in, outside of the vesting paperwork, we add them to Slack right away. We get them set up on the Google Calendar, and then everyone on the team shares their calendar. So at any given time, all Nebulum team members can see all other Nebulum team members' calendars. Again, that's back to transparency. We like that approach because then there's no middle person to go through. There's this time on this person's calendar. I need to talk with them, send them a calendar invite. But once all that's there and you get a key to the office, it's hit the ground running. And it's at this stage of the company, very much go and divide and conquer. So in the past, as we've expanded out and hired for software engineering, from day one, they're coding. They understand they're jumping in, they're solving problems that impact our revenue immediately. On the customer success side, same thing. From day one, you're interacting with customers just right away. On the production team, it's a very steep learning curve because you're thrown into, hey, we're growing leafy greens, microgreens, herbs, vine crops. You probably have some base understanding of horticulture or controlled environment ag experience, but we do things differently. We apply more of a manufacturing lens to our processes. So that learning curve takes a couple of days, but then once you're caught up, it's, hey, you have ownership over this process. And while you're doing that process, how can we improve it? Because we also expect that from everyone. We expect everyone who comes in and fills kind of those roles and responsibilities to have better ideas than we previously had. And that's why building a diverse team is really important too. Everyone from all walks of life bring different lenses to problems. And that's what excites me. And what excites me about building a team is people, like, I value naivety. And it's because if they come into the farm and they were really good at, let's say, coding, but they've never worked in indoor farming, their approach and their lens to solving our problems may be what we were looking for. But all of us are so much in the thick of it that we couldn't have seen that before too.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's really cool that you almost treat everybody in your company as a founder themselves, right? Like they have ownership over things, they know the numbers, they're like pushed in the same direction because everybody's fighting for the same thing. Do you think equity plays a big role in people feeling that ownership?
Good question. I think so. I think the second someone says, I'm investing, 50,000 shares here, and a few years from now, this could be life-changing money. It's that mindset of having ownership. I think that's very much why the organization of Nebulum right now is so awesome. And every single individual is an A player because they're just all bought into the actual vision. And another thing that I wanted to point out, it's it's important for everyone to know they have ownership, but it's also important for kind of external sources. Even though we would love to be able to avoid all that noise, it still impacts every company today, right? Whether it's supply chain issues or anything else. So an idea we had about a year ago is switching over the positions on the team to all have within their titles the word lead. And it's such a simple thing to do. But it used to be, so for instance, marketing intern, the software intern, that mindset, it automatically builds out like, okay, you're at the bottom of the totem pole. Whereas if we switch that to marketing lead, And yes, they happen to be a student at Iowa State. I don't care. Just they have ownership over that. So that's something I would encourage people to do, to think about. Even though we don't like the idea of titles, titles are how the world works right now. So giving them more ownership within their title gives them more empowerment.
That's awesome. I would have never really thought of that. And I think that's also something, a loosening your reins example, like as the co-founder, that you even felt comfortable to give like a marketing intern a lead title and like responsibility that might associate with that. So kudos to you. I think that's really cool.
It's been a fun learning experience with that. It's one of few experiments that have worked out. Most don't.
That's awesome. So you are really passionate about in-person work. Can you expand on that a little bit and maybe give us an idea of what your office space looks like?
Yeah. And then I noticed there's some questions coming in on the chat too. So happy to jump over there too. One thing that our VP of Finance and Procurement, Dave Biedenbach, who just joined us, spent months on recruiting for that position, and Dave was our top candidate, and we knew we wanted him to fill this position since day one of seeing that org chart and that missing puzzle piece. On hiring Dave, he came in and basically started cleaning up my mess over how we think of our cash flow and how we think of what we've built here in Ames. And today, we essentially have two teams in Ames. And that's because we have the Nebulum corporate team, who is the team that's going to be answering all of the scaling questions and solving all the scaling problems. And then we have a Nebulum Farm in Ames, where we have a production team in place. So we have Nebulum Farm Ames team, Nebulum corporate team. Later this year, we're looking to launch outside of Iowa with more Nebulum farms. We'll put a team in place there. So as we launch other locations, we see it as 1,000 to 3,000 square feet, industrial zone space. You walk in and we've deployed a bunch of our growing equipment, and there is just green produce and food growing everywhere. And that production team handles the seeding, transplanting, harvesting, cleaning, and the fulfillment, even the deliveries. Whereas in back here where the corporate office is, so I've got my office space, there's no windows in here. I get more work done that way. Whereas in the rest of the team have shared office space where 3 to 4 people comfortably in a room, next room right beside it, same thing. We're going to have to expand and figure out more office space. And I know the research park is jam-packed right now, so I'm not sure where we're going to put everyone. But making sure everyone has just a dedicated space, I think, is important. So they can come in and feel like they, again, have ownership over a spot at the office. I think that's important. On the in-person, we've been burnt every time we've tried to do a remote department. And I think it just goes along with who Danon and I are as individuals, where we value directness, and we cannot just jump on Zoom and tell someone like, hey, this is it, and then get a feel for the communication or how they're actually feeling afterward. So we've just made it to where, hey, if you need to go remote and you're traveling, that's fine. We already have put the belief in you, you're part of the team. But for positions, if the candidate's not willing to relocate right now, then it's just a no-go for us. And if you have a fully, just a complete software, 100% software company, it's probably easier, but we're hardware, software, and living organisms. So for the time being, everyone in person, building up that community and that team to go after a championship together.
That's awesome. I didn't see any questions in chat, but I don't know, maybe I'm not seeing the same ones that you are.
Oh yeah, so yeah, this was a direct message. So I have a question: how to secure your idea with your new partners who may be going in and out? So for instance, basically like shopping around or dating for a co-founder, if that's what you mean. That's a good question. So my recommendation, it starts with understanding your strengths and trying to find someone who has the opposite strengths. So you can have that starting kind of yin and yang team. One thing to do that builds a safety net around the company is, I'm a firm believer, especially on the technology company side, that founders need to vest just like all employees. So in the past, have made mistakes, with Kenasol. So 4 co-founders, day one, we all had essentially 25% of the company. At 2 years in, 2 co-founders leave. They've got all that equity. They no longer they no longer want to pursue this vision of the company. At 4 years in, I leave. I still have all that equity. That sets the company itself up for failure if you need to go out and raise capital, because all of a sudden there's this giant piece of what's called the cap table that is just sitting there, and it's equity that's dead, essentially. So my recommendation is starting a company, no matter what company it is. If you are getting a co-founder, put both of yourselves on a 4-year vesting schedule and do a 1-year cliff. And what I mean by that is at 10 months in, life happens, someone wants to leave, no harm, no foul, they have 0 equity. At 12 months in, they're 25% vested. And then both of you can just vest at every single month, clear through that 48 months or that 4 years. That really allows you to align your priorities and your incentives. And if life happens, again, no harm, no foul. Hopefully that answered that question.
Awesome. We had another question from the registration. They asked, what should you, it's kind of along the same lines. So what should you consider when you're partnering with a friend who could be a supplier or act in other way for your business? So essentially like working with friends, positives, negatives, what should you consider?
That one can go one of 2 ways. Either it can work out awesome because you are such good friends that you're the type that could get in these giant arguments and the next day you still call each other. Or you have the individual who you have a lot of respect for them. Maybe you've worked on some project on campus with them before, and you're like, wow, this person just has their life together. And then you join forces and you realize you're 2 entirely different people. And what you sold them on for the vision, they have another idea for the vision, all of a sudden being pulled 2 different directions. So I would recommend, for as far as starting companies with friends, definitely stick to the vesting. One of my favorite quotes is the band name stays the same, but the band members change. That is very, very true, just because life happens, right? On the other side of it, on the, friends as suppliers or partner with friends and maybe their startups or their companies, I used to feel like I wanted to give every other startup an opportunity to partner with us, because I said, we've been there and we're only like 6 months ahead of where we thought they were at the time. So it helps them, it helps us. What I found by doing that is most people, I hate to put it this way, but most people aren't meant to start companies. And it's because that long-term mindset and all of the just grinding it out and being severely underpaid and the opportunity cost, it doesn't line up to maximizing happiness. So maybe I'm a masochist, but I appreciate trying to solve the problems from the early stages. As Nebulum grows and gets 2 or 3 more years down the line, who knows? Maybe I won't enjoy the early or that stage of the company. But nowadays, I try to avoid partnering with friends or other early stage startups until they have proven that they can go as fast as we can. That we've shot ourselves in the foot before by having a startup saying, hey, we could build this for half the cost. So we're like, heck yeah, let's jump into it. It sounds good. And then we realize they don't know what they don't know. And as we all do, right? So that has made it where our timelines shift and ends up being they overpromise and underdeliver. And that sets you up for a failure too with your company, because it's always just go, go, go. Hopefully that answers that one too.
Yeah. If anybody has questions, feel free to add them in the chat. And while we're waiting for those, I have a few more. So you talk a lot about team culture. Can you tell us some of the fun things you do or things that you really believe in that are unique to Nebulum that help create that team culture?
So on our Slack, we have, and I'll touch on building in public here in a minute too, because that's also shaped our culture from both external and internally. But we have Slack, everybody's on it throughout the day, and we've created a channel on there called subscriber. And every single time we pick up a new subscriber, it's automatically dropped into Slack and it says, new subscriber, and there's a bunch of lettuce emojis, rocket ship emojis, everything's going crazy. And no matter where we're at in the building, we usually hear some Nebulum team member yell out, woo, or anything like that, right? But also on that same channel, every time someone churns and cancels their subscription, it drops in so-and-so has churned and here's the reason they stated. And it's very interesting in building something where it's so transparent, everybody understands where we're at as a company from revenue standpoint to all of our metrics. And what's exciting about having that channel, I've noticed that you get to the weekends and let's say 9 p.m. on a Saturday, someone signs up that comes through on Slack. We have 4 or 5 team members who get that notification. They're not working, but they get excited by it and they're responding with other emojis. And the team, that's energy. That's energy that you cannot have unless you are building something people want. And so it has to start with having a good product. But the second you have a good product, building a team around that to make sure you can distribute it properly, scale it properly, continue to grow in every which way you need to properly. So that's exciting. I think the team just gets energy from each other. As far as Dayton is way better on thinking about team outings than I am, but one of our go-tos, in Grimes, there's an indoor go-kart track. So we try to make it down there once a quarter, and I am highly competitive with it. So go in and it's a take no prisoners approach to it when we're there at the track, but that's fun. Some outings to Provisions, which is a 200 feet away walk, the Provisions restaurant here in the Research Park on a Friday afternoon for the team. In addition to that, I think in the building and public side, it's also brought more cohesiveness to the team. And what I mean by building in public is January of last year, we decided to move Nebulum over to letting anyone who essentially follows us on social media understand what our metrics are and how we're actually doing as a company. Dana and I did that for personal reasons because we felt like the weight of the world was on our shoulders of everything that was going wrong and how we had messed up and how things were happening to the company that we thought, well, this is crazy. Does this happen to everybody? And no one was talking about that. So we decided we'll talk about it, whether it's my Substack newsletter or literally a tweet where, hey, everyone who wants to follow Nebula on Twitter, here's the actual subscriber count where we're at. I think that's important. And having a consumer-focused company, it brings loyalty from subscribers and people who discover us and realize that we talk about when things don't work just publicly, and that means their voice is heard. But on the other side of that, all of the team members, of course, follow Nebulum on social media. So they see those interactions and they realize like, wow, we're interacting, like here's real people who are real subscribers to Nebulum interacting with us on social media. They're giving us feedback in real time. And we're actually iterating upon that and trying to solve those problems for them. And it just brings that cohesion together. So we got very lucky on shifting to building in public and having that align with the culture.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome thing that you all do. And as an entrepreneurship center, I appreciate the transparency because I think it is really easy to think everybody else is just doing better in the startup space or they have an easier journey. Because a lot of times those are the things that we don't talk about. Exactly. Yeah, you see the press releases around the fundraising or win, and you don't see the 1,000 other things that went wrong behind the curtain. Definitely. Yeah. So we have about 10 minutes left. And I'm going to give people a little bit of time to ask any questions in the chat. But I did want to give a shout out for our next week's session while I still have all of your attention. So we're going to talk about prioritization and time management, which is a great thing to add on after you have team members or before you have team members to really figure out where your capacity lies. And Clayton is a great resource. His email's here on the screen. And then maybe Clayton, if you want to drop some of the social channels for Nebulum where people can check you out or subscribe, support you, however you'd like. Yes, I'll drop just a couple of links here. So one, we're at Nebulum everywhere, but here is, oh, that was a direct message. 1 second, let me switch that back to everybody. There we go. So yeah, at Nebulum on all social media. On a couple of other notes, I shared the Airtable link and the equity calculator, but here's kind of a blog on my thoughts around, building an A team and, what we've got right and how we've noticed that. And then lastly, I believe, Megan, correct me if I'm wrong, but
The office hours is open to all Iowa State students and faculty.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just dropped that. I think as of this morning, I looked and there's a couple of slots left. Visit on campus, happy to answer kind of any and all questions there if somebody wants to sign up.
Yeah, so Clayton's offering up 15 minutes of his time for you to pick his brain one-on-one. So definitely take advantage of that. They'll be happening this upcoming Monday.
Yeah, that's right.
Clayton, if you could go back in time, what is one thing that you would change about hiring when you first started? Or what have you learned?
I would say that it all comes down to clarity. You need to have a clear vision and clear goals or targets that you need to accomplish, because you need to convey that to awesome people who can take it and run with it. If you yourself can't be clear with communication, you're ultimately going to build a house of cards for an organization. So you've got to have clarity yourself. Got to start there.
And what do you do if somebody ends up not being a good fit?
Ooh, so someone, it always hurts to let people go, but it's part of the job, and that's the burden you bear as the founder until you get to large enough. You have the HR department. But I think the good side about that, or the upside about that, is every single person I've had to let go over the years, it was more mutual. And it was, hey, this isn't the right fit. The writing was on the wall. Do it. We knew it. It took a very long time in many instances to be able to speed that process up and make it just a shorter amount of time. As soon as the writing's on the wall, do something about it. But that just, it comes with the experience.
Yeah. So anything else you want to share, Clayton?
Just happy to help at any point in time. Reach out. I am in fundraising mode right now for Nebnum's next round, so I'll be a little slow to respond outside of those office hours. If anybody's working on anything tech related and you think we could help in any way, really do reach out anytime, even if it's just concept phase clear through. You've got 1,000 customers and you're trying to figure out what you should do next.
Awesome. Well, Clayton, thank you so much for always being such a great resource and for your time today, and keep building cool stuff in Ames. We appreciate you and your contribution to the startup community here.
No problem. Thank you very much, Megan, for everything you do too.
Thanks.
Take care, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.